And Boxie, it is magic time. We are live. Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Harnisch, and this is Boxie. Boxie is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. Aren't you, Boxie? And we're going to talk a little bit about what Boxie is in here, because Boxie constitutes the complete works of Frank Jimson. And I want to talk about Frank Jimson a little bit today. So, I'm Larry Harnisch. I have been, if you're new, I have been researching the Black Dahlia case since 1996. I began by doing a story for the Los Angeles Times on the 50th anniversary of the Black Dahlia case in January 1997. And since then, I have been researching it with breaks here and there. I had a full-time job, and for a while I had a more than full-time job. So I wasn't working on the Black Dahlia case 100%, but I'm working on it now. And I always like to start off with an update on the book. I'm at 100 and let's see, I think I'm at 154,000 words as of Friday. And that constitutes the life of Elizabeth Short. I'm done with that. Right now I'm working on the crime scene. So the way this works is I will talk for a little bit, and I have some fun. I have some really fun stuff to talk about, so that'll be fun. And then I alternate, and then I do Q&A, questions that are live from the chat and the ones that have been submitted. And the chat is on super slow. I generally get trolls, so I will report them immediately. If you see some about abuse, go ahead and report them as well. Don't be shy about it. I do get the Hodel people or just crackpots. Let's see. Oh, I got some fan mail I want to read for you. Harnisch, no one cares anymore. You only had 300 views in the last 4 months. My question is, when are you going to finally finish your book? Probably never. That fellow got blocked. Okay, that is a sure way. That is a one-way ticket to Blockville. So anyway, but I do get fan mail, and it's generally of that variety. The one other thing, just sort of in terms of housekeeping, is I have a separate session on George Hodel and Steve Hodel. That's the third Tuesday of the month, so that's coming up September 17th. Also at 10 a.m., also on Instagram and YouTube. So this one is only Dahlia questions, and that will be that. The next Dahlia session, October 1st, 2024. October, does that seem possible? October, 10 a.m. Pacific time on YouTube and Instagram. Okay, now I want to point out something for various people who need to hear this. And if you don't need to hear this, just play along. Okay. This is Ask Me Anything, as in ask, okay? Questions. This is more of a statement than a question. Yeah. If it's not a question, I'm just going to feel free to ignore it. It's ask, okay? So that's the first thing I want to say. Second of all, I want to talk about Wikipedia. On the chance that certain people are here or will watch this later, okay, Wikipedia is a mess. I don't edit Wikipedia anymore. I haven't edited it in many, many, many years. The only thing I do is I will go into the Black Dahlia suspects entry, and I will delete Jacob Edward Fisk. He was added one day, years and years ago, as a prank, and deleted the same day. But Wikipedia being Wikipedia, every so often somebody goes back and restores Jacob Edward Fisk. No, he was never a suspect. It was a prank, and that is that. I don't edit. I haven't edited Wikipedia in years, but I do monitor a couple of Wikipedia entries. and they would be Black Dahlia suspects, obviously, George Hodel and Black Dahlia. And for certain people who show up here from time to time, I see that you are interacting with Wikipedia and you're cruising for a bruising. All I can tell you is if you decide to take your time to spend time editing a Wikipedia entry of anything involving the Black Dahlia case, someone is eventually going to come along and trash your work. Either it will be a bad faith edit, which happens a lot. Somebody will come along and say, "Key Rice, this is boring. Who cares?" And they'll just knock out paragraph after paragraph. They do that. Or someone will come along having read Severed or Black Dahlia Files, and they will go in and change all this stuff. So if you decide, and you're on your own, if you decide to get involved with Wikipedia, and I hope you're hearing individuals who need to hear this. If you decide to interact with Wikipedia, be prepared for the idea that somebody's going to trash all your work. It's just going to get nuked. Okay. End of Wikipedia. The other kind of news nugget about Black Dahlia on the internet that's sort of fun. I occasionally discuss Black Dahlia in Hollywood, and I know they talk about me. Well, the Black Dahlia in Hollywood shut down its forums for a while. And apparently they're back up now. I don't know what went into it. I avoid Black Dahlia in Hollywood, but I do know because I have alerts. I have a lot of Google alerts about the Black Dahlia case and about my name. So when somebody on Black Dahlia in Hollywood talks about me, I get an alert on that. I know. So if you are on Black Dahlia in Hollywood and you were posting to the forum and the forums went away, they were back, or they were back as of a couple of weeks ago. I don't know what happened. I don't care. Okay. Somebody sent me a question about Frank Jimson and I lost it. And then I found it again. Or I asked them to repeat it. So that's kind of where I am. Now, I'm doing a lot of work on the crime scene at this point. I'm spending a lot of time on the reporters who were there and also the police officers as much as I can identify them in the photographs. So I'm spending a lot of time on the photographs of the crime scene. And I've done a lot of digging on the two lead detectives, Harry Hansen and Finis Brown. And as a result of that, I'm also reading, because it's in Boxie here, the statements of Harry Hansen and Finis Brown to the Los Angeles County Grand Jury. And the contrast between those guys and Frank Jimson is like night and day. I need to talk a little bit about what sort of investigator Frank Jimson was. When Steve Hodel talks about him, he'll say, well, Frank Jimson was this white hat and the LAPD had buried the case and Frank Jimson magically left this duplicate set of files for Steve Hodel to magically find. No, none of that's true. Absolutely not one word of that is true. Zero. But it is really, I'm very pleased to be able to read the Hansen and Brown statements to the grand jury. Now, why were they talking to the Los Angeles County grand jury? Why does Boxie exist at all? That's because of the Leslie Dillon fiasco. And somebody over on Instagram has a question about P. Wheatwell's book, and it seems very convincing. Yeah, P. Wheatwell left out tons of what is in here, okay? If P. Wheatwell had read everything that was in here and not ignored it, Leslie Dillon would have been totally eliminated. So her book is basically just not even worth reading. It presumes to be accurate, but it's junk. Anyway, long story short, Leslie Dillon was the target of a rogue investigation within the LAPD, headed by Paul DeRiver, and the headed by and the Gangster Squad. Okay, and the investigation blew up. It was a huge fiasco for the. Yeah, you know what? I'm writing the book. I just gave the report. So I think you are going to go away. Bye. So anyway, the grand jury got involved in looking at the Leslie Dillon fiasco, and it was a fiasco. So the bulk of the investigation is about Leslie Dillon. But there are some good things in there. Harry Hansen and Finis Brown gave statements to the district attorney, to the grand jury, that are quite valuable. And it is really a pleasure to read their testimony. You can see it's very clear that they were sharp homicide detectives, and more important than that, the way Harry Hansen specifically was playing like 3 steps ahead. Okay, I interviewed this guy, and it wasn't just, well, we need to figure out who did it, but how is this going to play in court? Who's going to be a good witness? Can we put this person on the witness stand? No. How about this? How about that? Very sharp detective. It is a pleasure to read his testimony, and also that of Finis Brown. So that's kind of what I'm doing now, is working on that. Now, for the entertainment section of this Q&A, before I open it up, Patrick O'Reilly. Now, somebody said, hey, Patrick O'Reilly, you say he's a non-starter, but there's more information. We have more information about Patrick O'Reilly, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay. So what about Patrick S. O'Reilly? Now, I don't trust any research that I don't do myself. So articles have been written about Patrick O'Reilly and he changed his identity. It's pretty clear that he changed his identity. He came out to Los Angeles and reinvented himself, which is not uncommon. People did that. It was a lot easier to do that in the 1920s than it is now. So, yeah, apparently his name was Patrick Trier. He had an older sister, Frances. And when you go through the old, if you want to spend like an hour just sort of researching, trying to figure out something, check out, Patrick O'Reilly and his sister, Frances, and her husband. I mean, that is like next level research. All of them are just really, really tough. Okay. So Patrick O'Reilly's in World War I, and he gets, there's all these stories about Patrick Trier getting shot up. And is Patrick Trier really Patrick O'Reilly? Yeah, he probably is. Anyway, he comes out to Los Angeles in the 20s. And there's this wonderful story about how he was at the beach, and there was this young woman who was out in the waves in this rowboat, and her boat capsized, and the waves were so turbulent that people were afraid to go out there. But Patrick O'Reilly rips off half his clothes and swims out there and saves this young lady and brings her back, and he's a big hero. And then he sort of just disappears into the crowd. And I believe it's the Examiner did a story about him, and they get into his war career, and they talk about, he was all shot up in World War I, and he has more medals than he can count, and he got so many that he didn't want any more medals, blah, blah, blah. All his World War I heroism and all that, which I don't really care about. But anyway, this is a 1922 article, and says he's so grateful to the people who took care of him that, he decided to become an osteopath. And so he was at the Los Angeles College of Osteopath Physicians and Surgeons, something like that. I forget the exact title, but anyway, that's where he's going. Now, he's supposed, when you go to the medical directories, he didn't graduate until 1929. So that's like 7 years, really? Okay. And it so happens the yearbook of the osteopathic college is online. And I've gone through it, and I can't find Patrick S. O'Reilly. I've gone all through it. He's not there. He's not among the seniors. I don't know. Anyway, that is the story. But what the interesting thing about his rescue is that it says, well, he's living with his sister in Los Angeles, Frances, and it gives the last name of Collette, Collette. So if you do a newspaper search then for Frances Collette, it's like, well, she's kind of shady too. Here's the Frances story. I think it was later the same year or within a year or two. A woman calling herself Mary Smith goes down to San Diego, and she contacts these two unmarried women who are piano teachers living in San Diego. And she says, will you take care of my daughter, who is 5? The daughter's name is Rose. Will you take care of my daughter? And here is a check to pay for her expenses for a while. Okay, fine. And she leaves with this check, and she leaves the girl with this check and a couple of suitcases. Well, would you believe it? The check is no good. It's written on a Los Angeles bank. The check is no good. And would you believe it? The suitcase of clothing, the clothing in the suitcase, that was also written with a bad check out of Los Angeles. The other suitcase is just dirty clothes. Well, the little girl knows her name. She knows her name is Rose Collette. So she's telling people, and she says, well, my daddy lives on a train. What? And she talks about an Uncle Pat. Okay, we know who Uncle Pat is at this point. It's Pat O'Reilly. Anyway, you do a little more digging and you find out that Frances, the sister, married this guy named Harry, not Collette, but Coulette, Coullette. Okay. What's his story? He's impossible to find. Very difficult to find. Frances, it's hard to find out what happened to her. The little girl, she disappears. And so all we're left with is Pat O'Reilly. And he does become an osteopath. And then we get into this thing about whether he assaulted his switchboard operator. And remind me to talk about the Jimson. Jimson will say that he assaulted her he was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. No, he was charged with rape. And he supposedly badly beat her. I think the Glendale cops took a picture of the victim. I'm not sure it was ever published. Anyway, O'Reilly gets up there and he says, look, I couldn't do that because, and he takes off his shoes and socks and says, see how screwed up my feet are? And then he opens up his shirt and he was all shot up in World War I. And so it's like, here's all my wounds. I can't do that. So he was put on probation, and then he countersued and all this other stuff. Okay, that is the beginning of the Patrick O'Reilly story. Now, when you go out online, you will see that, he was this great surgeon and he performed this life-saving, and this is how I get my jollies. He performed this life-saving surgery on this renowned stage actress, Lucille Laverne. Oh, really? Tell me more. Yes, it's in the San Francisco paper. Really? And when you look up the story in the San Francisco Examiner, which is a Hearst paper, it talks about this miraculous surgery. It was one of the greatest operations ever performed in the history of medicine. It's like, what? What? Okay. Now, you would think that if a Los Angeles osteopath, because he was an osteopath, and that's important, performed this miracle surgery, all the Los Angeles papers would be after him. They would all write it up, right? No. When you go through, because all these papers are online now, it's easy to check. The woman involved is Lucille Laverne. Yes, she was an actress. She appeared on Broadway, kind of tiny roles. She was in movies, The Silence. Her big claim to fame was a play called Sun Up on Broadway, and she directed that and appeared in that. And that was made into a movie. But it's not like she certainly wasn't in, the Greta Garbo class, something like that. It was like she was a working actress. Anyway, the story in the San Francisco Examiner is that she was, in terrible shape, and O'Reilly performed this miracle surgery and establishing that, O'Reilly was this great surgeon, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Why haven't the Los Angeles papers written it up? Because the only place that story appears is in the Examiner. Not only is it only in the Examiner didn't even put the story on page 1. It's buried on page 6, and it's like a little story like that. This miracle surgery. It's like, why is that? Why is that? And the Examiner had kind of hyped it all. The Examiner has said, Lucille Laverne near death, famous actress, blah, blah, well, near death, because that was the Examiner. Okay. So this is not where you're done researching. This is where you begin researching. It's like, okay. And you ask yourself, who's the source of this story? Who is telling the Examiner that O'Reilly did this miraculous life-saving surgery? Would you believe it? The source of the story is Patrick O'Reilly. He said, yeah, I did this surgery, and it's not written up anywhere else. So, you have to say, well, maybe it sounds kind of suspicious to me, because none of the other papers got anywhere near this story. And in terms of O'Reilly being a surgeon, there's another story that's pretty interesting, where he treated a guy. I think he was a painter. He was some sort of trade in a trade, and the guy had a broken arm, and he set the arm in a cast, and there was a wound in the cast. And get this, instead of removing the cast to operate on this wound, O'Reilly cut a hole in the cast to treat the wound. It's like, what the hell kind of doctor does that? Give me a break. So, and what happened was the guy ended up losing his arm and brought a lawsuit against O'Reilly. So, I mean, you're dealing with somebody who is kind of a self-promoter. I mean, when you read the story, and I highly recommend digging up the story in the Examiner about his rescue of this woman and all the medals he had, and he had turned down even more medals, and he had stood in the trenches for 3 days and all this other stuff. And it's like, yeah, he was shot. The one thing we do have is information that's not from him. It's from a Red Cross nurse. A Red Cross nurse wrote to the family and said, yeah, O'Reilly has been shot up, and he's in a hospital. He's on his way back to the States, and he stutters. He's got shell shock, and he stutters. That's the only thing we know from anybody other than himself, because Patrick O'Reilly is not a guy that I'm not gonna take his word for anything. So in terms of him doing life-saving surgery, the only one who says that is himself. I did it. In later years, he styled himself as a hand surgeon. He frequently spoke at osteopaths conventions. When you go through the later stories, you'll see, yeah, he addressed the convention of osteopaths here or there or whatever, and he would talk about his hand surgery, stuff like that. There was some sort of, and I'm just vaguely remembering, there was some sort of thing about where he wasn't directly involved in an abortion. He might have, I mean, there was some, maybe did he kind of refer a woman to an abortionist? And that was sort of vague. The way the abortionists work, very quickly on that, because I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, is a woman would show up at a doctor's office if she thought she was pregnant, and she wouldn't use her right name. She'd say, I missed a couple of months, doc, what do you think? And he would say yes, no. And as I said, she probably didn't use her right name. That was typical. And she was probably from out of town. That would also be typical. And he would say, yeah, no, maybe I can't do anything about that. I can introduce you to a friend. And that sometimes happened. And so the doctor at that point would just say, adios, lady. I don't know. I said I can't do anything, and here's a number if you want to call somebody, but I don't know anything. He might have done that. But that's about all I have to say on Patrick. But again, the whole point of this is, does any of this change what we know about Patrick O'Reilly already? He was kind of a shady guy. Well, we've just added more evidence that he was kind of a shady guy. We knew that. We knew that already. That's not new. I mean, it's just another layer of how shady he was. Um, but the only time period that we're interested in with any of these people is July 1946 to January 47. That's all we care about. What somebody did in 1922 or 1932 is irrelevant. And you just have to be cold-hearted and say, well, that's an intriguing story, but no. And you just have to be cold and clinical and say no. And what we know about O'Reilly at that point is he didn't have any connection with Elizabeth Short. He's not in her address book. We know that. What's left of her address book, he's not in there. The DA's files say, oh, well, he was friends with Mark Hansen. Okay. Who says that other than Frank Jimson? Nobody. And let me point out, Mark Hansen also did not kill Elizabeth Short. He also didn't do it. Nope, didn't do it. Eliminated. Mark Hansen was in the theater business. He was in the nightclub business. He knew a lot of people. Knowing Mark Hansen is not against the law. And, I think it's in Jimson's. Well, O'Reilly used to go to the Florentine Gardens a lot. Okay. Is there anything to show Elizabeth Short ever went to the Florentine Gardens? No, there is not. And very briefly, let me point out, Elizabeth Short was kind of a prude. That was her act. Believe it or not, this woman that supposedly slept her way across Tinseltown. No, her act was that she was from a very fine family in Boston, and she couldn't believe the way people carried on in Los Angeles. That was her act. So no, the Florentine Gardens, which featured a lot of female flesh, would have been absolutely no. No, it was absolutely not something she would have done. So we're kind of back where we started. Patrick O'Reilly is an interesting character. But again, he was investigated and eliminated. He remains a non-starter. But as I said, if you want to kill an hour or two, research his life, look into the life of his sister, Frances Trier, or Frances Coulette, Coulette, or Colette, or her husband, Harry J. Coulette. See if you can find anything on these people. It'll keep you busy. It will give you hours of entertainment wondering who are these people. Or the daughter, Rose, what happened to her? That, she was dumped down in San Diego, and it's like nobody knows what the hell happened to her. Anyway, that's what I do for recreation. And with that, I will now go to the questions here. Let's see. Sean asks, let's see. If you could time travel back to one day after the murder, what piece of evidence would you look for, or who would you question? If I could go back to a day after if I could time travel, I'd go to the day that Elizabeth Short's body was found. I would go to the crime scene. That's what I would do. And beyond that, maybe and I need to emphasize this. I forgot to mention this earlier, but it's pertinent with Patrick O'Reilly. People tend to treat the Black Dahlia case like a game of Clue. They have Frank Jimson's list of suspects, and it's like, well, the killer has to be on here somewhere. They just didn't have enough information to get him. No, all those people were eliminated. Patrick O'Reilly, Carl Balsiger, Sergeant Chuck. Those people are all non-starters. They were all investigated. George Hodel. Okay, all those people are eliminated. It's not a game of Clue. And so, in terms of that, probably, as I said, go back to the crime scene. Then I would check in with Walter Bailey and Alexandra Partika. I would check in with them. But other than that, it's a hypothetical. Okay. Let's see here. Could there have been more than 3 crime scenes where the body was found, the vehicle, and the actual place of death? Okay. This is from John Douglas. He said you have multiple crime scenes. And they are what? You have the place where the killer and the victim cross paths. That's one. The place where she was killed. That's another one. And then the place where the body was left. So those are the 3. Beyond that, I mean, the car that she was transported in, I'm not sure if that would really count as a crime scene. Okay. Is it possible to obtain Dr. Bailey's medical records via a subpoena? Okay. Great question. I tried to do that. Dr. Walter Bailey was, assuming that the records even exist, and we don't know that. We don't know that they do. But he was treated at the VA. If he had been, he was treated at the VA, and the autopsy was done at the Veterans Administration. If the autopsy had been done by the Los Angeles County Coroner, that would be public record. But the VA is different, and I tried to get that stuff, and it's like, nope, you don't get it. And so that was kind of the end of that. So let's see. Okay. What kind of weapon was used for the mouth, and should police have pressed Marjorie more about Elizabeth? I'm not sure precisely what was used on her mouth. I'm guessing it would have been a pretty sharp blade, something on the order of a scalpel. And in case you don't know, there are a number of different types of scalpels. There isn't just one. There's all kinds of different specialty blades for doing different things. So that would be my guess. Should the police have pressed Marjorie more about Elizabeth? They did. Finis Brown actually went back to Cambridge. Marjorie Graham had been kicking around Los Angeles with Elizabeth Short and then went back to Cambridge. She's had enough of LA. And so Finis Brown actually went back to Cambridge and interviewed her at some point. Often what the police did in those days would either they would have the local police or the FBI interview witnesses. But in this case, he actually went back there. So her story to the papers was that I barely knew her, which is kind of typical of people who knew Elizabeth Short. It'll be like, yeah, I really didn't know her all that well. And that's kind of the song and dance that you get with Marjorie Graham. They worked together in a restaurant on Harvard Square. They were waitresses together. And Marjorie said, I worked one shift and we worked the other, and I knew her to say hi to, but that was it. I really didn't know her all that well. What they got out of the police, or what the police got out of her, might well have been more detailed. But that's, as far as what's publicly available, that's about all we know. She didn't say a lot to the news. She didn't say a lot to the reporters. Okay. I wish someone did this quality of digging on the Zodiac case. You know what, Andre? Somebody sent a link to me, and I thank you. You know who you are. There's a reporter for one of the San Francisco papers that has been their Zodiac correspondent for many, many years. And his big thing is knocking down all the nut job conspiracies on the Zodiac case. I don't do Zodiac. Zodiac is its own thing. It's complicated. Sorry, Instagram. Let's see. There was one. Yeah. So I don't. It's too complicated to even take that on. So I will let the Zodiac people do that. But there is a guy, and as I said, somebody sent me a link. I think he's done some YouTube videos, but he is a reporter assigned to the Zodiac is kind of on his beat, and so that is, and apparently he does good work. I don't know. I'm not a Zodiac person, but anyway, Harry Hansen thought he interviewed the killer who drove a '38 Ford. Okay, that wasn't Harry Hansen. That was Ralph Asdell. Okay, Ralph Asdell thought he interviewed a guy. Ralph was a friend of mine. Ralph was loaned to the investigation He was assigned to, if I remember correctly, Boyle Heights. And he was loaned to the investigation. And he was loaned to the investigation and interviewed Red Manley. He did the lineup of person's shoes with Red Manley. That's where you see the photograph. He's the guy holding like the purse that Red Manley is sniffing. That's Ralph Asdell. Ralph thought he had interviewed a guy, a good suspect. And like a good detective, he passed that along to Harry Hansen and Finis Brown. And that was their call on what to do with it. He was frustrated that they didn't follow up on it. But that was Ralph. That was not Harry Hansen. Harry Hansen was absolutely positive that he never talked to the guy. I would know. He said, I would know if I ever talked to the killer. I never talked to him. I know that. We never interviewed the guy. I would know. And so that is a direct quote from Harry Hansen. Okay. Let's see here. Let me scroll down here. Oh, okay. In Kenneth Anger's Hollywood Babylon 2 chapter on Elizabeth Short, there is a photo with a cut line reading, "Movie buff Bob Chatterton befriended Elizabeth." But there's no information about Chatterton at all within the copy of the actual story. Now, I know 99% of Anger's written work is bullshit, but I'm curious if Chatterton, whom I gather was a film historian of note, factors into Elizabeth Short's life at all. Was this maybe just Kenneth Anger showing off a photo of a friend of his and fabricating a connection that didn't exist? Or have you ever stumbled upon an actual connection? No, it's Kenneth Anger bullshit. Kenneth Anger isn't just 99% bullshit. It is 100 or 110%. No, that guy has absolutely no connection at all to Elizabeth Short or the Black Dahlia case. That is just Kenneth Anger bullshit. Let's see. Okay, that's that question. Okay, let's see. I wish I could figure out where the lost week, where she was and whose company go missing for a week. Nothing determined. Was she held prisoner for a week? We don't know. We absolutely don't know where she was for a week. And there is a certain retired homicide detective, Steve Hodel, said, "Oh no, there was no missing week. You see in the newspaper, it says she was here. She was here." Okay. Now, the police checked out all of those sightings and more. And when you read the statement to the grand jury, which is in here, Boxie, when you read Harry Hansen's statement to the grand jury, he say, "We could never figure out where the hell she was that week. We don't know. We could never figure it out." Who says that? Harry Hansen, lead detective, says that. Jack Donahoe, captain of homicide. We don't know where she was. We don't know. They never figured it out. And regardless of the, people who insist that the lost week was all made up, no, they don't know. Okay. Let's see. Do you think there'll ever be something with Beth akin to Sharon in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood story or such, showing her as just a girl and not just a murder victim, or has there been? My experience, and I can only talk about my experience with Hollywood, is that the way Hollywood treats the Black Dahlia story, it's a snuff movie. They would make it into a snuff movie. If they were going to do a Black Dahlia project of any sort, it would get turned into a snuff movie, which is why I would never, ever, ever sell the rights to my movie rights. Not that it would ever happen, but if Hollywood said, "Hey, we want to option your book," no, because Hollywood, I guarantee you, they would turn it into a snuff film. They absolutely would. Yeah, I have seen the TV movie "Who is the Black Dahlia," and I talked to the guy who I talked to the guy who wrote it. I'm blanking on his name right now. Very nice fellow, a former newspaper guy, and he had to change a lot of details at that point because this was in the 70s. People were still alive, and so he had to change identities. He had to change, like Phoebe. If you notice in the TV movie, there is no Phoebe Short. Phoebe wouldn't sign a release. There's no Red Manley. He wouldn't sign a release. And so they had to change the, yeah, exactly. They had to change all that stuff. And that was deliberate. I'm blanking on the guy's name. Anyway, so no, and that's how Hollywood would operate. It would be a snuff film. Okay, let me go down here. Okay, because I lost this question and it's important. I want to ask you about a report of Frank Jimson about the Black Dahlia investigation that said at least 50 persons remain that should be interviewed, and there are at least 25 more persons that should be re-questioned. On the date of this report, there are 107 remaining possible suspects. Was Jimson exaggerating, or were there really so many loose ends in the investigation? Okay, great question. Thank you for asking. Now, this Boxie, right here, represents the collected works of Frank Jimson. And I have read everything in here. Some of it hasn't been in a long time. But yeah, at one point or another, I've read absolutely everything, all of Jimison's reports, the written reports, and his handwritten drafts, and notes and phone messages. I've read it all. And I want to emphasize that the contrast between the lead detectives, Harry Hansen and Finis Brown, and Frank Jimson, is light years. When you read the statements, the testimony to the grand jury of Harry Hansen and Finis Brown, those guys are sharp. They know investigation. And I might have mentioned earlier that they're thinking 3 steps ahead. And Brian Carr did the same thing. In fact, I tried to encourage Brian Carr to write I will help you write a book about homicide investigation. He didn't want to do it. The sharp, in Brian's words, the guys who use their noodle in homicide investigation, when they are at the crime scene, they are already thinking, they are already playing out, how is this going to work in court? How am I going to present this evidence? It isn't just who did it. They're like 3 steps beyond that in terms of how is this going to play in court? How is this going to be presented? Is so-and-so going to be a good witness? All that kind of thing. And you can see, Hansen especially, but also Brown, that's how they're looking at it. When they evaluate a witness, it's like, well, we can't really put so-and-so isn't going to be a strong witness on the stand, and that kind of thing. Jimson, on the other hand, is, boy, he's so frustrating. And I know Steve Hodel paints him as this white hat. And the guy's really, he's a second-rate detective. And there's no beating around the bush about it. He is just a second-rate detective. He gets lost in the weeds all the time. When you read what Hansen and Brown say about Mark Hansen, it's like, okay, we looked at this and this and this, and we're done. And Frank Jimson will just chase his tail and go around and around and around and waste all this time on the Astor Motel, which they eliminated. They had the crime lab go down there and they tore the place apart and they found nothing. But Jimson just kept spending time at the Astor Motel and Mark Hansen and this mysterious man from Batavia. And he had these people who, maybe they could identify Mark Hansen, maybe they couldn't. The husband was sure, but he wanted to check with his wife. He's like, you can't put people like that on the stand. The confirmation that you need is absolutely, yep, that's it. And so, what happened was this. And it is really frustrating to read some of Frank Jimison's interviews, especially the one with Red Manley. That one was really, in my opinion, bungled. He did 2 interviews with Ann Toth that are useful, kind of, but it's a mixed blessing. Anyway, the deal with Frank Jimson is, I think Frank Jimson was operating on the Frank Jimson Full Employment Opportunity Act. Okay. Why is that? Grand juries serve for a year. After a year, the grand jury disbands and they get a new one. Okay. So Frank Jimson, and I'm not sure which memo this is. He wrote a lot of memos, but at the very end, as one grand jury went out, Frank Jimson was operating under the impression that the next grand jury, the incoming grand jury, would continue the Black Dahlia investigation, and that he would, continue to follow up and do all this stuff and make reports to make reports to the grand jury. Well, they lost interest in the case. They didn't call on Frank Jimson to testify. And so I think what he was saying is kind of like he wants to keep working on it, and the grand jury lost interest in it. And that's the gist of what I get from the final memo. So, again, how many people were really needed to be interviewed or re-questioned? As far as Finis Brown and Harry Hansen were concerned, and they say right in their grand jury testimony, everybody who knew Elizabeth Short was considered a suspect who had to be eliminated. So it's everybody, and she crossed paths with a lot of people. So that's a lot of work. So that is the more substantial answer. They had to track down everybody in her so-called address book, which they did, except for I think one or two people they couldn't find. They tracked down everybody in her photographs, all her snapshots, and she had tons of snapshots. They tracked down all of those people as well. So there were a lot of people to interview. In terms of moving forward the investigation, goodbye. Okay, that is how you deal with a troll. Just like that. Bye. So, he wanted to keep it going. And Jimson went down all these rabbit holes and everything else. Anyway, that's my best take on it. Jimson is a mixed blessing. He did interview people, but a lot of what's in here is just, when he's interviewing the people who think they saw Mark Hansen at the Astra Motel or the man from Batavia, and all, it's like, no. Anyway, okay. Let's go back up here. I missed some questions. Can I scroll back up? Let's see. I'm trying to scroll back up here after I block. Okay, well, for some reason there we go. Okay. How did John Gilmore come up with Jack Anderson Wilson as a potential killer? Okay, this is a fun question. John Gilmore met this Skid Row drunk, Jack Anderson Wilson. He was living in a flop house on Skid Row, and Jack Anderson Wilson thought he knew who killed the Black Dahlia. And when you read the transcript of one of Gilmore's interviews with him, you can see Gilmore is feeding him money and buying him drinks, which is exactly how you treat an informant, is you buy them drinks and give them money. You're sure to get accurate information with that. And in fact, one time Gilmore apologizes. I know these are 20s and I know you like smaller bills. I mean, it's really hilarious. Anyway, Jack Anderson Wilson had the misfortune to die in a fire. And so once Wilson died, John Gilmore promoted him from informant to suspect, because who's going to know? And that's really it. Gilmore did a lot of BS promoting of his case, his solution, and it's just junk. If Wilson hadn't died, it would have, he just conveniently died. And so Gilmore took advantage of that. Let's see here. Thank you. Could you add such a chapter on your book? What was that about? Oh yeah, yeah. I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about Ralph. Okay. Let's see here. Oh, let's see. Do you think the items found in the trash can outside the Wall Bar Cafe, the purse, the shoes, etc., were actually shorts? Red Manley seemed sure, but it seems like a weird scenario. Okay. This is what I'm talking about. At some point after Elizabeth Short was found, and I think it was about the time, I forget the exact chronology, the killer mailed items from her purse to the Los Angeles Examiner. And it was a little bitty envelope full of her address book and business cards and birth certificate and stuff like that. About the same time, there was the manager of this cafe on Crenshaw found a purse with shoes that had been stuck in the purse on top of a trash can. But he said, Jesus looks important. This could be related to the Black Dahlia. And the trash guy said, now we get this stuff all the time. And so the trash guys dump it and take it away. And so the police show up and it's like, well, what happened to it? Well, the trash guys. So the police go to the dump, the landfill, and sort the trash. And they get all the purses from that were collected that day and all the shoes. And that's the picture of Ralph Asdell that you see, where he's doing a lineup of purses and shoes for Red Manley. And Red Manley identified the shoes, identified the purse. He said he recognized her fragrance. Okay. Now, the French family, Dorothy and her mom, Elvira, they hosted Elizabeth Short for a month. And they came up from San Diego. And they were shown the purse and the shoes. And they said, no, that's not hers. So which is it? Red Manley said he thought so. The Frenches said, nah, not. So the answer is maybe, probably not. Inconclusive. I think the law enforcement answer would be inconclusive. So yeah, it is a weird story. It was a big sensation for a day or two, and that's about it. Okay. What's the page goal for the book? I don't know. I'm going to write till I'm done. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, since the autopsy concludes that blunt trauma to the head caused the death, Elizabeth Short was dead before being bisected, evidently did not die from being severed. No, Elizabeth Short died from shock and loss of blood. Remember, she was bonked along the head. And when you look at the morgue photos after she's been cleaned up, you can see that she was pasted really, I think it's either in the morgue photos or at the crime scene, one or the other. You can see that she was pasted really hard, like right here. And the detective said it was a whole line of boom, 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 like that. Any one of those would have rendered her unconscious. So, yeah. Can you conclude from this the very possibility, the main and possibly only reason she was bisected was not necessarily to make the crime scene even more odious, but mainly to make it easier for the body to be disposed of if the murderer or accomplices was of small stature, not physically strong, a woman, or extreme? Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what John Douglas said when I interviewed him. He said, as much as it seems like, wow, he cut her in half. No, the killer was just making it easy on himself. That's all it was. It was about ease of transportation. The important thing is the skill in which she was bisected. And again, I defer to Harry Hansen, his statement to the grand jury that it was a fine bit of surgery and took a long time. And so the medical examiner, Frederick Newbar, and Hansen felt that it was a very fine medical man, I think were the words that Harry Hansen used. So yeah, but for no other reason than to make it easy to transport the body. And of course, once you cut a body in half, it's going to bleed. So you need to do something with the blood. And so they knew that the killer had access to running water. And indeed, she had been immersed in running water for a while, because if you remember, when they took her fingerprints, it was hard to get a good set of prints because her fingers were swollen from being in water. So she had been immersed in water for some time. So yeah, but that's what that was about. Okay, it's very important for me to do my bookkeeping. Otherwise, I repeat the same questions over and over, and nobody wants that to happen. So, okay, let's see. Let me go over to Instagram here. Instagram, I'm going to have to say goodbye to you Instagram, I'm going to have to say goodbye to you in 2 minutes. Okay, sorry about that. Let's see. Okay. Right. Have you interviewed people who knew Dr. Bailey? Yes, I have. Yes. They say he was a good man, fine surgeon, but he really underwent a radical personality shift late in his life. And they were kind of shocked by the transformation in him from the person they had known. Yes. Okay. Let's see. Oh, this is a good one. I stayed in Medford recently. Does Medford give off small town vibes? So I was just curious if there are any descendants of Elizabeth who live in town. Thank you. Okay. This individual emailed me and said, well, I was in Medford and I visited the memorial to Elizabeth Short, and it's kind of a small town. And are there any of her family still live in the area? Okay, first of all, and I can't say this enough, the family of Elizabeth Short hates that memorial. They absolutely hate that with a passion. They weren't consulted about it. They don't like that it was placed near where their house used to be. They do not like the fact that the memorial, the plaque gets into how she was killed. The memorial, by the way, was paid for, to the best of my knowledge, by a guy named Kyle Wood, who was a Dahlia buff back in the 90s when I was doing my research. And he helped me out with some material early on. I haven't heard from Kyle Wood in ages, but that was, he paid for that memorial. So the Short family really hates it. So that's my take on the memorial. As to whether Elizabeth Short's relatives still live in the area, okay. You have to remember that Elizabeth Short was not from Medford. The family moved all over the place, especially when Cleo. Instagram, you got to go, or I'm going to lose you. Goodbye. So sorry. As long as Cleo was part of the family moved all over the place. They never stayed put at all. Cleo, their latest, he got a job in Medford. He had a city job, I think it was with the highway department. And so they settled in Medford, and then he took off. And so Phoebe and the girls stayed. And that's how it happened. So they don't really have, the Short family really didn't have roots in Medford at all. And they took, they're all girls, they all took off. And at this point, I don't think, whether there's anybody living, certainly, I don't think there's anybody living in the Medford area. I did meet one of the sisters who lived a ways in Massachusetts still. But my understanding is she is no longer living. And I am very reluctant to get into the current status of the Short family. They don't want to be found. They really don't. And I would say, getting back to Wikipedia, whoever finds it necessary to put in the names of Elizabeth Short's sisters, that's just ghoulish genealogy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what, anything about her sisters is just meaningless. That's just ghoulism, as far in my opinion. Well, on that note, it's o'clock, and our hour is up. I hope everybody's had a good time. And let's see. And fast. Thanks a lot. Okay, there's somebody else I need to report. Okay. Report. Okay. Alrighty. So much for that. John Donson. I don't see any John Donson here at all. Okay, well, I don't seem to be able to scroll back up here for some reason. Once again. Okay. It's been great. Adios, folks. Have a great month. We'll see you in a month.